Interpreting, inspiring, informing. That's Kathryn Gagnon's job at the Cowichan Valley Museum and Archives, where there are new discoveries made every day.
Well, for me, a really surprising fact was that there was even a Cowichan Valley Metis Association. That's what really surprised me. I was familiar with the history in Manitoba and the prairies, but the president of this association was in my office, and he talked about this association, and I said, I didn't know that there was a Cowichan Valley Metis Association. This is one of the communities that we need to look at. Let's do a story about you.
Kathryn says there are 3 official Aboriginal groups in Canada: First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. For many of us, Métis is synonymous with French-Canadian settlements or the Red River area of Manitoba. Kathryn shows us how Métis came to be in the Cowichan Valley.
Well, there was a migration. Like other Aboriginal groups, there were many challenges that people were dealing with, the loss of lands and that kind of thing. And that's what brought many people here to BC. And so there are books written about the Métis in BC, and I was so pleased to find that the history was quite well documented. Probably one of the most exciting things developing this exhibition is the work I did with members of the association. It started about 3 years ago. We started meetings. I said to the people around the table, well, what does it mean to you to be Métis? And it took a second for them to think, well, what does it mean? So we had an amazing, wonderful discussion about what that means. And then I invited all of them to write about and articulate what it means for them to be Métis. And that's what provided the stories for this exhibition. They all eloquently spoke about what it meant for them to be Métis and their stories and their histories. They're presented here now. I couldn't be happier about it. What I like about what we've presented here is that they're very intimate stories.
There are stories of Métis women with roots leading back to World War I in England. Stories of young children who didn't know what Métis meant and were unaware of their own heritage. One common element that ties the Métis to other Aboriginal groups in Canada is racism. Still, the Métis built a strong identity and culture.
Well, I think that there's a lot of pride. There's a lot of pride in the material evidence of their culture, and there's pride in the production of them. So, for example, when we had an opening and we had people undertaking all kinds of crafts, one of them was weaving the sashes or doing the beading or making moccasins. There's that pride in that skill and what that means as part of their identity to produce these beautiful things. And so the members of the association were extremely generous in loaning us these wonderful things from their own family collections. It's interesting, sometimes people look at some of the artifacts that are Métis and misidentify them as First Nations. But actually, one of the things that impresses me is, the textiles and the art of beading, for example. It really is extraordinary and beautifully well done, and really based on history as well, because beads were one of those things that were traded, with First Nations as well. But because they were a trade item, they were incorporated into the art as well. I think really for me, it's the textiles. For sure, is really very distinct from what I know of First Nations art here.
Cowichan Valley Métis members are very committed to education. They hold summer camps each year to instruct young Métis members about their own culture. To assist in the understanding of Métis people, Kathryn explains the link to a more well-known aspect of Canadian history.
Sometimes when people think of Métis, they think of the voyageur. So what's interesting is the Métis culture really grew because of the combination of First Nations women who became what was called country wives, or sort of wives of the Europeans that came over, the people in the fur trade. And so this whole new people came from that, from those unions. And so the voyageurs were a very important part of the overall history, and that's because they knew the rivers intimately. They could carry huge amounts of goods, and they were sort of like the go-between between Europe and people here and what was produced here. So, for example, one of the artifacts we have in the exhibit is a beaver hat, a beaver pelt hat, and it's there because it was so important to what drove the desire for furs, and that was fashion. It was really, really important at a time, and everybody wanted this. So that's what the fur trade was about. So that's why we have that there. But the voyageurs, were hardy. They had to be so hardy and so fit, you know. And also, from the Métis people I've talked to, there's a really strong sense of pride in their work ethic. And when I read about what the voyageurs did, you know, physically and mentally as well, I just think they were intrepid. They were intrepid. So I think that's a really important thing about their culture.
Telling the stories of the Cowichan Valley, Kathryn takes exhibits outside the museum and archives as well. There are a number of outdoor panels throughout downtown Duncan, documenting the history of early settlers, popular events, and tales of those who built the community. Back inside the museum, the Métis exhibit clearly shows a little-known aspect of Cowichan's history.
I had a really interesting comment a little while ago, and somebody said, this is an invisible culture to me. So it just gives me goosebumps, because I think, well, this is what we do. You know, this is why when the president was in my office 3 years ago, I said, I really want to tell your story, because I don't know, that means other people don't know. And I think for me, that people go away and say, this is another aspect of the Cowichan Valley community that I now know about. And that's what would make me happy.